Bengals handing out cash to their wide receivers. As we welcome you to NFL Live, Adam Schefter is here with all the latest. What can you tell us, Adam, about what happened here with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins?
Laura, these deals have been in place over the weekend, and the truth of the matter is Jamar Chase's deal would have gotten done even sooner, potentially, if Myles Garrett's deal hadn't gotten done. But once he got done and the Bengals had promised to make Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, the arrangement that they were working on had to be altered, and they had to boost his price to over $40 million a year. But Chase and Higgins wanted to be together. You heard Joe Burrow publicly lobbying to keep everybody together throughout the offseason, and the Bengals finally found a way to do it. The agreements basically were in place all weekend long. They signed off on the final details last night, and now Joe Burrow is there for $55 million a year, and Jamar Chase is there for over $40 million a year, and T. Higgins is there for nearly $29 million a year, and the Bengals are going to have to find a way to create value from draft picks on the defensive side of the football, because they've got an awful lot of money now invested in the offensive side of the football, and that doesn't even include Trey Hendrickson, who they still are exploring re-signing or potentially dealing. They'd like to keep him if they can, but that's another issue for another day.
Yeah, more on the Trey Hendrickson side of all this coming later in the show. But here's why Joe Burrow campaigned so much for the Bengals to keep both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Last year, when both Chase and Higgins were on the field, Burrow's 8.2 yards per attempt would have ranked fourth as a full season average. His 6.5, when either of them was off the field, would have ranked 31st out of 36, ahead of only Mac Jones, Caleb Williams, Bryce Young, Daniel Jones, and Cooper Rush. There's no doubt that Joe Burrow sees those numbers as well. As we officially welcome you into the show, happy St. Patrick's Day to all of those who celebrate. I'm pinching Mina Kimes. I'm not pinching Sam Acho because it looks like he's wearing some green. And Adam, I'm pinching you, okay? Field Yates is joining us a little bit later on as well to talk the draft. We'll get to that in moments as we carry on here. Mina, we questioned if the Bengals could get this deal done and pay both Chase and Higgins. Now that it's done, what do you think?
I think that this was both the correct decision and a somewhat fraught one. So first, why it was correct. As you saw from those numbers, when both those receivers are on the field with Joe Burrow, this is a top 5 offense that is known. I would also argue that because of Joe Burrow's style of play, which is he prefers to sit in the gun, read things out, hunt matchups, aggressively attack downfield, having 2 high-end receivers like he does in Chase and Higgins is more valuable than it would be in even another type of offense. So there's a stylistic factor here. And also, speaking of Burrow, there's the human side of it. This offseason, we saw he put himself out there a bit and said he wanted these deals to get done. He called on the Bengals to spend some cash. And while we can quibble about the fact that they took perhaps too long to do these deals, they did alter their typical contract structure in doing it. So they kept their quarterback, the most important person in the building, happy. That matters. Now, as far as the fraud part goes, well, the defense was very bad last year, and they're going to be hard-pressed to improve it, given some of the limitations they have. But we can worry about that later in the show. As far as the offense goes, this makes total sense.
Well, I think when it comes to the improvements defensively, I know we're not going to get there yet, but Al Golden, the new defensive coordinator, is hopefully going to be a big factor in some of those changes. But back to the offense, I think it's the right decision to keep both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Why? Because of the relationship, of course, but also let's not forget about Mike Gesicki in there as well. So now Joe Burrow has 3 weapons, 2 stud receivers and a stud tight end who's not only electric but consistent to be able to help his offense go. He was the number 1 quarterback last year when it came to yards. Jamar Chase was Triple Crown winner. All of a sudden, not only is he happy, but you will produce. The question for me still remains, what will they do at offensive line? That has to be answered. Joe Burrow is not going to be able to get the ball downfield to his receivers if he's getting sacked 60-plus times like he did not too long ago. And so for me, it's going to be offensive line is the key question that needs to be answered now that both receivers are in place.
Well, Sam, offensive line is a question, defensive line is a question, and how this team overcomes paying so much to both these players also becomes an issue. You heard Mina mention the fact that they could have gotten these deals done sooner. If they had gotten these deals done at this time last year, at that time, Nick Bosa was the highest paid non-quarterback in football at $34 million a year. They could have gotten Chase done again At the start of the season, that would have been just north of $35 million. Then they could have gotten the deal done before Myles Garrett. That would have been $37, $38 million. Now they wait for after Garrett. And at some point in time, when you know you're keeping Ja'Marr Chase, when he is as good as anybody in football, it's time to just get the deal done. By waiting, the price on him went up. And they got something of a value on T. Higgins, who could have gotten more on the open market, but because they franchise tagged him in 2 successive years and he had the tag, that number was a little bit lower than I think other teams would have been willing to pay him on the open market. But the Chase deal exploded, and his numbers got higher and higher and higher the longer they waited.
All right, as we have all teased, we're going to talk a little bit more about Trey Hendrickson later on in the show, so you don't want to miss that because it's really interesting. But, Adam, there is more news as it relates to the Texans. They extended Derek Stingley Jr. Tell us more.
A 3-year, $90 million extension that includes $89 million in guaranteed money. That makes Stingley the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. And the Texans clearly did not want him going anywhere. I think some teams were a little surprised that the Texans did this deal when he had as much time left at the value they did it. Not that Stingley's not an incredible player, he is, but I think it caught some teams by surprise, the level of the deal, the timing of the deal. But once again, we have a new highest paid defensive back a week after J.C. Horn in Carolina grabs that title. And so now in successive weeks, we see one player leapfrogging over another, just like Myles Garrett leaped over Max Crosby. Now we see, at this point in time, Derek Stingley Jr. leapfrogging over J.C. Horn.
By the way, J.C. Horn joining NFL Live tomorrow. Don't miss that. But back to Derek Stingley. He allowed a 47% completion percentage when he was the nearest defender last year, according to NFL Next Gen Stats. That was second best in the NFL, trailing only his own teammate, Kamari Lassiter, which he could have had something to do with. Mina, what do you think of this deal for Stingley?
Yeah, well, just from a football perspective, definitely earned. Derek Stingley Jr. is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire NFL. He has the ball production, I believe 31 passes defensed over the last couple of years, 10 interceptions. Next Gen Stats has him allowing the lowest yards per target of any corner in football. And I think part of the reason why they felt like they could do this is because they have drafted so well in defense. I mean, that name you saw there, Kamari Lassiter, home run pick, Bullock, the safety, obviously Will Anderson Jr. up front. They have been incredibly successful on that side of the ball. And having those players on cheap contracts does give them some lenience when it comes to paying their other players like Stingley Jr. I do question a little bit the timing and perhaps more so just in terms of asset allocation here, what the plan is with the offensive line. When you kind of expand it to the other side of the ball, that remains a pretty significant concern for me with the Houston Texans. But as far as the player and the value and what he has done on the field, makes perfect sense. He is an absolutely tremendous cornerback.
I think it's the right decision, Mina. And the reason why I say that is because DeMeco Ryans is a defensive-minded head coach. What does DeMeco Ryans love to do, even when he was in San Francisco? Loves to rush with 4. And so people talk about the rush and the coverage working together. When you have a guy like Derek Stingley Jr. on the back end locking down your top receiver, and all of a sudden you have Danielle Hunter and you have Will Anderson Jr., all of a sudden your rush and your coverage work together. And now to your point, yes, there needs to be some offensive line changes that are going to happen. But now you know your defense is completely set. You can focus when it comes to the draft on the offensive line.
Yeah, we'll see what they end up doing when it comes to that O-line, because again, that was an issue last year, and then they traded some guys away. Make you wonder exactly what the plan is there, but to Mina's point, we'll keep an eye on it. All right, we got a lot more coming your way today on NFL Live. Don't go anywhere, as Vikings reporter Jamison Hensley said Ronnie Stanley addressed the media after signing a deal to stay with the Ravens. He said, quote, "I was going to give Baltimore the best bargain that I would offer to any other team. That being said, I wanted to be happy with what I'm making and make sure I'm getting the value that I deserve." Felt like he got that, so good for Stanley and good for the Ravens. Let's get back to some top stories. Adam, start with the Bengals paying both Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins.
All right, Laura, the Bengals answered a major offseason question, making Ja'Marr Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history and making T. Higgins the highest paid wide receiver 2 in NFL history. They keep the core of their team together and ensure that Chase, Higgins, and Burrow will spend the primes of their career playing together in Cincinnati. Meanwhile, the Houston Texans made All-Pro cornerback Derek Stingley Jr. the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. He tops J.C. Horn, the Panthers cornerback who got his extension done last week. Stingley gets 3 years, $90 million, $89 million guaranteed for the way he's played like an All-Pro in Houston. Meanwhile, everybody's waiting on a decision from Aaron Rodgers. He continues to be linked with the Pittsburgh Steelers, with the New York Giants. Well, there continues to be some speculation about what level of interest the Vikings might have. It doesn't sound like Minnesota is the likely landing spot right now, but it certainly can't be ruled out. And so we'll wait to see what Aaron Rodgers decides to do in the end, while Russell Wilson also waits to make his own decision. He's visited with the New York Giants. He's visited with the Cleveland Browns. He's mulling what he would like to do here going forward. The Steelers have some level of interest in bringing him back to Pittsburgh, but it seems like everybody's waiting to hear from Aaron Rodgers first before the other quarterbacks decide. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Falcons kept Kirk Cousins on their roster, as they said they would, past Saturday, which means that triggered a $10 million roster bonus next season that becomes guaranteed. Now, the Falcons feel like if they trade him, the acquiring team would then be responsible for that $10 million roster bonus, which is why they were willing to keep him around. But it's just more guaranteed money for Kirk Cousins, who would like a change of scenery. Both sides are dug in right now, and it doesn't seem like we'll get anything now on Kirk Cousins until after the NFL draft at the earliest.
Yeah, woo. All right. Acho, let's start there. Is keeping Cousins a good idea for the Falcons?
It absolutely is, and at least for now, that's the issue with Kirk Cousins, is the fact that the trade value for him isn't high. He ended last season not only as a backup, but I think it was 9 interceptions in the last 5 or so games. He struggled, and so teams aren't going to want to give up draft capital for Kirk Cousins. But that doesn't mean that the 13-year NFL vet going into year 14 isn't a value add for Michael Penix Jr. Michael Penix Jr. played a national championship in college. Michael Penix Jr. has an electric arm, but Michael Penix Jr. also needs to understand the game at a higher level. There is a benefit for young quarterbacks learning from veterans, and I get it. They were on the team last year. He had his 1-year runway, but it wouldn't hurt to give him another year if you cannot get a high level of draft capital for Kirk Cousins. So I think it's wise for for Atlanta to keep Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty expensive mentor you got in the building. That said, I don't disagree because Michael Penix Jr. also has a pretty significant injury history. So if you were to move on from Kirk, I don't know what the plan would be as a backup, but it would most likely be a pretty significant downgrade from Cousins, even at this point in his career. The other reason, and Sam, you're right about this, there's not a lot of draft capital likely to be had in a trade. So while you would be able to potentially incur some cap savings, as you see here, although if you had to eat into his contract a little bit to do a trade, you would limit those savings to some degree. I do question whether it would be worth it given how likely little they're going to get in return. So this is not an easy one for Atlanta by any means, but of course it's a situation of their own making.
Yeah, you mentioned the cap savings. There's a couple benchmarks there, maybe after the draft, depending on teams that still need a quarterback, and then that post-June 1 area where they could have some savings. Cousins has a $40 million cap hit in 2025, 7th highest in the league. All right, there's been a lot of wide receiver movement so far this offseason. DK Metcalf was traded to the Steelers. Deebo Samuel traded to the Commanders. Devontae Adams signed with the Rams. Christian Kirk traded to the Texans. Joshua Palmer signing with the Bills. As you see it all right there, it gets you excited for next year. Adam, take us through a couple wide receiver moves from this weekend. Let's start with Juju Smith-Schuster.
He's returning to the Kansas City Chiefs, Laura. The Chiefs had an interest in bringing him back. He had an interest in returning back to Kansas City. Gets a 1-year deal done to go back to the Chiefs, where he gets the opportunity to play with Patrick Mahomes and become a free agent again after this upcoming season. As for another big wide receiver move that was made over the weekend, Cooper Kupp went from the Los Angeles Rams to the division rival Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks have been in need of another wide receiver. They moved on from Tyler Lockett. They traded DK Metcalf. It left Jackson Smith and Jigba really as the one lone established wide receiver. Enter Cooper Kupp, who gets a 3-year, $45 million deal from the Seattle Seahawks. He obviously is familiar with the area. He went to school in that area, knows the state very well, and is thrilled to be in Seattle now, teaming up with Sam Darnold to try to help replace some of the wide receiver losses that the Seahawks incurred this offseason.
As much as we all kind of thought maybe he would stay on the West Coast, let's talk specifically about the scheme in Seattle. Mina, is Kupp a good fit there?
Yeah. I think it makes sense for the vision, and this sort of affirms what I think was behind the decision to move on from Geno to Sam, aside from the cost savings and the draft pick they acquired in the trade, which is this is not a rebuild in Seattle. It's a retool with a very specific schematic vision, which is centered around their offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak. It's a Kubiak offense they want to call. Shanahan, McVay from the same tree. They want to put Sam under center. They want to run play action. They want to boot him out. They want a wide zone rushing attack. Their hope is that he's the right quarterback for that it'll help the offensive line, and that Cooper Kupp, who has been in that offense now for years, can contribute as a blocker, amongst other things, as well as a guy who can get you yards after the catch. He is not the separator he was early in his career, no doubt. But when you think about the overarching vision of this offense, and I think what they're trying to build, then it starts to make sense in that context.
Yeah, to your point, the versatility is so attractive. Adam, still a lot of veteran wide receivers available, though. What are you hearing about that market?
Well, it's an interesting market right now, Laura. You've got Stephon Diggs that's still sitting out there, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Tyler Lockett. Some quality veteran wide receivers. Obviously, some coming off injury, but a lot of receivers there that could help teams. But there's that many veteran wide receivers out there that doesn't help each of the receivers as they try to land a deal in a new place. But again, if there's a team looking for wide receiver help, it's certainly available to them. Meanwhile, one player who was on the move this weekend was the former 49ers running back Jordan Mason, dealt to the Minnesota Vikings Saturday night with a 2025 sixth-round draft pick. The 49ers get back multiple draft picks, move on from Jordan Mason, who was highly productive in place of Christian McCaffrey last year when he was dealing with injuries. The 49ers right now believe that Christian McCaffrey will be back. Isaac Garindo will be ready to thrive next season. Patrick Taylor has been good, and the Vikings wanted to shore up their backfield and give a compliment to Aaron Jones, and they now have Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason behind their quarterback, we presume, say J.J. McCarthy.
They've done so much to surround McCarthy with everything that should lead to success. The O-line, the running backs, wide receivers, obviously. All right, some of the impacts that free agency moves had on the draft. And check out this post-free agency mock draft that Field Yates put out. So there you see it. And Field, thankfully, is here with us in the flesh to talk through it a little bit more. So, Field, take us through the top 3 picks that you have there.
Yeah, let's do it, Laura. And it was a quiet week for the most part for Tennessee at the very top on the quarterback front. They did sign Brandon Allen, who has some familiarity with Brian Callahan, but there is not a clear-cut, obvious quarterback plan in Tennessee right now, which is why I have Cam Ward from Miami going number 1 overall. What will be the first draft pick for new GM Mike Borgonzi in the second year for Brian Callahan. Ward is my number 1 quarterback in the entire draft, and I think in the eyes of most evaluators, clearly the number 1 quarterback in this entire class. My number 1 player in this class, though, is Travis Hunter, the wide receiver or corner. He could be both at the NFL level from Colorado. The Cleveland Browns make him the 2nd overall pick in this draft. Now, they still need to figure out their own quarterback situation. That being said, they have already visited with Russell Wilson. Wouldn't be a surprise that some of the other veteran options remain on their radar as we get closer to the draft. Hunter, too good to pass up. I believe he has Pro Bowl upside on both sides of the ball. Finally, Shedeur Sanders from Colorado goes to the New York Giants. Yes, they are kicking the tires on some of those veteran quarterbacks, but they do not have an option that gives you a lot of confidence long-term right now. It is a critical year for both their head coach and their general manager. Shedeur Sanders, the 17th rated player on my board, but given the supply and demand that we always talk about leading up to the draft with quarterbacks, he goes 3rd to give them an infusion of some sort of excitement at that spot in the Big Apple.
Yeah, I think it'd be exciting. Let's hear what Dion thinks. Here's Dion today on Shedeur.
Shedeur is a workaholic. You guys know that. He is who he is, and sometimes people forget what he's accomplished here at CU and how accurate and how good he is, because you got to take a shot at somebody. And you might as well take a shot as a Sanders. We built for this. We've been through this from birth. We've won. He's getting drafted. He's going to go in the 1st round. We're thankful, and we're just trying to pave the way for others. So we can't lose at this point. We're so darn blessed. We're not stressed. Do you see how I look right now? Do I look stressed? Let me take these glasses off so you can zoom in. Do I look stressed? No, I look blessed.
He really does look blessed. I'm trying it on for size. Adam,
It's
what
working.
are you what are you hearing, Adam, about Shedeur and the Giants?
Well, it's hard to be stressed when you are as blessed as the Sanders family is. And clearly, Dion believes that Shedeur is going to be a high, very high draft pick, despite the fact that there are some questions out there about him. And again, you come back to the supply and demand law. Even though there might be some team saying some things and wondering about where he might go, the fact of the matter is he is going to be a high quarterback in a draft where a lot of people view this draft class with two top quarterback talents in Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And I think once we get past the first pick with Tennessee, assuming the Titans don't trade that and assuming Cam Ward goes number one, I think Shedeur Sanders begins to come into play. 2, 3, the Raiders, a number of other teams, but I don't think he's going to be on the board very long. He is expected to be a high draft pick. There will be plenty of discussion about where he's going to go up until the draft, and it might just be the most interesting question on draft night, where Shedeur Sanders is going to go. I still ultimately say the Sanders family is blessed, not stressed. Dion knows that.
Okay, you know what? I found out that Dion's glasses work really well because I can't see anything, so I'm going to take them off. But it's a good look. There's like even a green tint going on here for St. Patrick's Day. Mina, are the Giants better off taking Shedeur or going with Abdul Carter there at 3, assuming he'd be there?
Yeah, I think between those two players for New York, Sanders does make sense. If it was Hunter, might be a little bit of a different conversation for me, but they're pretty well set at edge. Obviously, you always are open to taking an elite edge rusher because of the value proposition, but this is a team that traded for or paid Brian Burns. You have Kayvon Thibodeau, some decent depth there, and of course, the glaring need at quarterback. I do think it would be an interesting schematic fit with Brian Dable. He's just so different from the other quarterbacks he's called offenses for in the NFL. But there are pieces in New York that would make you optimistic about what you might get out of Shedeur early in his career, most notably, of course, the wide receiver they took last year, Malik Neighbors, a guy who can take it to the house. Shedeur can give the ball to him quickly and accurately.
I think we just need to look at the state of where the New York Giants are right now as an organization and some of the options that are on the table for them in the veteran quarterback market. All right, so they've already met with Joe Flacco. They've already met with Russell Wilson. They're meeting with Jameis Winston today. And Aaron Rodgers is, of course, out there as a possibility for the Giants. I think the common thread amongst all 4 of those players, though, Laura, is that none of them is a guarantee to be an option for the Giants for even a full season, right? Like, it's possible you bring one of those guys in, and then you're yanking a player from the starting lineup if you had somebody like Shedeur Sanders available on your roster. And while Shedeur is imperfect, if you're a coach and a general manager that are on the hot seat for this year, a young quarterback at least gives you a bridge to the future that can provide some optimism. Even if you don't win a ton of games, if you show development and if you hit on this quarterback, and we know how uncertain every quarterback prospect is in the entire NFL draft, no matter what year it is, it at least gives you a chance to present the case as to why you're the right people for the job in 2026 and beyond. I think Shedeur is not going to wait very long once we get to April 24th.
Yeah, and you would hope that Shedeur in that case shows some flashes. You see the possibilities. You see what he could bring to the table. Adam, let's go back to that number 1 pick. What are you hearing about the Titans taking a quarterback at 1?
Laura, I think that they're being very diligent and thorough in their approach, and they want to do a lot of work before they make a decision. It certainly sounds like if they stay at 1, that Cam Ward would be the number 1 pick, and if a team traded up, Cam Ward would be the number 1 pick. So it's going to be up to Tennessee and the new general manager, Mike Borgonzi, to decide here. Are they better off? Do they believe enough in Cam Ward to stay there at 1 and pick their quarterback of the future? Or are they better off dangling that pick, getting back a boatload of draft pick compensation in return, and basically punting on getting your quarterback of the future until another year? That's the biggest decision that they're going to make here in the coming weeks. But it certainly seems like there's a mounting consensus that Cam Ward is going to be the number 1 pick. And if we look at what the Titans did during free agency, they did not make a move for an established veteran quarterback. The only quarterback that they signed in free agency was Brandon Allen. And there is what they've done during free agency. They beefed up the offensive line. They didn't address the quarterback position in a meaningful way, and that would seem to suggest, for whatever that's worth, that quarterback could be the direction that this team moves in on draft night.
Yeah, as that was happening during free agency, they're bolstering the O-line. We're all like, oh, this means they're definitely taking a rookie quarterback. We'll see. Mina, the issue here is if you do that, then that means if you're the Titans, you're passing up Travis Hunter, who is generational, exceptional, and Abdul Carter, who's the same. Are you okay with that, them passing on those two to take a quarterback?
I am, and my thinking on this has changed a bit. Right after the Super Bowl, when we first started talking about that, I thought the Tennessee Titans, you got to take one of those two players, Carter or Hunter, or, try to get some draft capital in the process. But a couple of things have contributed to me changing my mind. One is just spending more time with Cam Ward's tape. The more time I watched him, the more exposure I got, the more belief I felt there was a pretty significant gap between him and the next group of quarterbacks in this class. And also, I think he is more pro-ready than I thought at times, especially watching him in college periodically. I think he also just has such an enticing set of skills and traits. He has the sort of arm talent that is worth spending 1-1 on, as well as the athleticism and some of the playmaking ability. And then the other thing is what Adam alluded to, which is I did really like their efforts to bolster their offensive line. I know that Dan Moore Jr. contract left tackle might have raised some eyebrows, but he was a competent left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now you can move J.C. Latham to the right side, gets to play next to the vet, Kevin Zeitler. I would still like them, Field, to have maybe a playmaker for Ward to throw to, but if I'm a Titans fan, I would be very happy with them taking the Miami quarterback.
Yeah, there's still some work to do on that pass catcher front, especially that wide receiver spot. That Calvin Ridley was signed to a huge deal last offseason. He's already approaching 30. They have to have the long-term view in mind. Mina mentioned the athletic ability of Cam Ward. I actually think there's a lot more meat on the bone there than Miami and even Washington State tapped into on the running front. Part of that's probably because he was putting up these video game numbers as a thrower. Why bother running him all that often? That being said, there's even more in the skill set of Cam Ward that I think can be opened up once he is in an NFL offense, and a team probably needs him to use his legs more than he did at the collegiate level.
That's enticing. I mean, I do feel like with this quarterback class, it's obviously not what last year's was, but maybe Cam Ward is getting some of this where we're all just comparing everything to last year. Maybe he's a little better than what we're giving him credit for. I feel like a few people, now Mina included, have watched the tape and thought, he could be really, really good. All right, a lot more coming your way here on NFL Live. Don't go anywhere. Field's going to return a little bit later on. We're also talking about Michael Penix Jr. He's QB1 in Atlanta, but Kirk Cousins is still on the roster. Someone here thinks it's actually wise for the Falcons to keep Kirk on the team. We're going to make him explain. That's next, right here on NFL Live. Make everybody give us the answers here. But you do wonder why the Patriots didn't make Abdul Carter at number 4, you see there. Now, the Patriots have been one of the busiest teams in free agency. They signed Milton Williams, Carlton Davis, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane to bolster Mike Vrabel's defense. They also signed tackle Morgan Moses, Jacoby Brissett, Jonathan Jones, and Dietrich Wise all left the team, so just things to keep an eye on. Again, as I mentioned before we went to break, they didn't get a wide receiver, but we're going to leave that for now. Sure. Field, why Carter over a wide receiver to help Drake May?
Yeah, I got to draft for value, not need in this circumstance here, Laura. Abdul Carter, whether you have him as the first or the second best player in the entire draft, he's going to be in most people's top 2, and he was that for me. He's the number 2 player on my big board. He had 12 sacks this past season. He was terrific when it mattered the most for Penn State. Played through a shoulder injury in the playoffs and looked no worse for the wear. This guy's explosive off the edge, and the Patriots did sign Harold Landry, a veteran player, but to be very clear, Abdul Carter would immediately become the best edge rusher this team has on its roster. They still need to add to that position in general. So the Patriots got a lot of work to do on offense, but for now, the defense would take on more life, Mina.
Yeah, I agree, Field. I think there's 2 players in this draft who are worth going best player available, Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. That pass rush is also, as you outlined, a need. This was a team that was dead last in sack rate last year, 27th in pressure rate. Even with the additions that they've made on defense, it's still a glaring need, and one where if you hit it, if you find a Will Anderson Jr. type in the draft, you save so much money in the long term, not in the long term, but over the next 4 years. We're seeing how much Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson soon are about to get paid, we're going to talk about. So you get a lot of value there. It also helps your quarterback, by the way, having an elite defense that can help in that regard so that they're not constantly forced to play from behind. All of that said, there is a lot of work to be done on this offense to help Drake May. I know they tried. They missed on guys like Chris Godwin, Ronnie Stanley. They need to continue to be aggressive. It can't just be the draft, whether it's a Tyler Lockett or Stephon Diggs. I would pick up the phone and call the Steelers about George Pickens now that they've signed DK Metcalf. They have to be aggressive about doing something because right now May does not have enough help.
Man, they were trying so hard to get Chris Godwin, too. Yeah. By the way, the Patriots are the favorite to draft Travis Hunter over at ESPN Bet Sportsbook.
That would help.
Still there.
Yeah.
Maybe they go up. I don't know. All right, at number 6, Field has the Raiders taking Ashton Genty. Now, the Raiders' biggest move of the offseason didn't happen in free agency, of course. It's when they traded third-round pick to the Seahawks for Geno Smith. But they did add some other players. Safety Jeremy Chin, defensive end Malcolm Kuntz, along with guard Alex Kappa and Raheem Mostert. So they've made some of those moves. Also, of course, they did the big deal. Why can't I think of his name right now?
For the Raiders?
Yes.
Max Crosby?
With Max Crosby.
There we go. Yeah.
Thank you, Field.
I was wondering if there was somebody that I couldn't recall.
You're like, wait, what move did they make?
Going through all the...
Sorry, Max Crosby. You are the best. I don't know why I forgot your name. Field, why Genty, though, for Las Vegas?
Yeah, there are a couple of gravitational forces working in opposite directions in this circumstance here, Laura. But let's start with this. Ashton Genty is the fourth-rated player on my overall big board. He broke 88 tackles this past season, 19 more than any other player in all of FBS. 2 years ago, he led all FBS running backs in terms of receiving yards. He can do everything that you can ask a running back to do. He also will now, in this circumstance, play for a Pete Carroll coach team, meaning it will tell you he certainly loves to run the football and do it aplenty. Their depth chart pretty weak right now. Raheem Mostert, you mentioned him, added formerly of the Miami Dolphins, but it's not like there is a guy that you can trust in this backfield at this moment. Other side, and Alcho can take this away from here. A lot of running backs in this draft, and some would say taking any running back, even a great one like Ashton Genty at number 6 overall, is a bit of a reach on principle.
I agree, but what I will disagree on is this. You're talking about what Ashton Genty can do out of the backfield as a receiver. You know who's a better receiver? It's Tedderall McMillan, who's an actual receiver, and that's what the Las Vegas Raiders need. They need a weapon, a true number one. Yes, they have Brock Bowers, who's a dominant tight end, going to be one of the best moving forward. They also have Jacoby Myers, who could be a complementary piece of wide receiver. But if you want to win now, if you're Tom Brady and you will have Geno Smith, you need a number one receiver, and I think Tedderall McMillan is that. He's 6'4", he's big, he's fast, he's athletic. Freak athlete. And so I think about when weapons need to be looked at, he's the one you need to go and get. Tedderall McMillan, I think, is the best decision in this offense.
Yeah, we may not be talking enough about McMillan, to be honest. A lot of the focus has been around Ashton Genty.
At his pro day today, did McMillan about that.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, the Raiders, by the way, ranked last in rushing yards per game last season, so they could use some help there. Okay, Field has the Jets taking Armand Mimbu at number 7, the Missouri product. Now, the Jets made some major moves for first-year coach Aaron Glenn. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, DJ Reed, Javon Kinlaw, they will not return to the team. New York brought in Justin Fields, Josh Myers, Brandon Stevens, and Andre Sisco. So, Field, why Mimbu for the Jets?
Yeah, Morgan Moses, we talked about going to New England just a few moments ago. They now have a glaring right tackle need due to the New York Jets. And Mimbu has a case for the best offensive tackle prospect in the draft. I've got him as number 2. This is a big, physical young man, just 20 years old. He's a Kansas City kid who played for 3 straight years at Missouri, played, at least in some people's eyes, might be a better fitted guard. I believe this guy's a right tackle all the way through. He had a terrific combine as well. This is not just a combine workout warrior, though, Laura. He was terrific this past season for Missouri. He's a tone setter, as that clip right there shows you. He's not afraid to mix it up in the trenches. A gifted pass rusher as well, Shefty.
Well, Field, if the season were to start today, the Jets starting right tackle would probably be Carter Warren. And the Jets have a new general manager in Darren Muji, a new head coach in Aaron Glenn. If we think about what worked for the Detroit Lions, it started when they rebuilt their offensive line. That's where their attention was, and that was one of the keys to getting that franchise turned around. I think anytime you have a new GM and a new head coach, anything is possible, but offensive line makes as much sense as anything else.
I like Shefty's analysis of my pick.
I know.
It's nice when they agree with you.
You know, I do think, Field, that we're going to see a lot of these O-linemen go, as we always do, higher maybe in the first round. People are like, man, where did Armand Mimbu come from? It's like, no, he's been there, and teams need these O-linemen. It's a real thing.
Other than like maybe Philadelphia, nobody has enough depth along the offensive line, so they should all be drafting plenty of them early.
And there's a lot to get. All right, coming up next, Cincinnati, open up the checkbook. It's 2-star wide plus. Back here on NFL Live, a huge day in Cincy. Adam, take us through it all.
Well, Laura, Jamar Chase becomes the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, a deal over $40 million per year, beating the total that Myles Garrett came came in at a short time ago with the Cleveland Browns. Meanwhile, T. Higgins comes in close to $29 million. The Bengals keep both of Joe Burrow's targets, which he lobbied them to do. Now the question becomes whether they can keep Trey Hendrickson, who led the NFL in sacks last season. The team has been talking about trying to extend him. The team has also been open to allowing him to find a trade partner. In a perfect world, the team would like to keep him. The question is, what's going to work out here? Can the two sides figure out a deal that would keep him in Cincinnati, which I think Trey Hendrickson would prefer, or can the two sides not come to a common ground, in which case the Bengals could look to deal him? Complicated trade to work out, which gives Cincinnati a certain advantage in trying to keep him, but this issue still remains to be decided.
Yeah, Chase and Higgins will now have a combined average annual value of $69 million. That's over $10 million more than the next closest wide receiver duo. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle make a combined $58.3 million. Mina, should the Bengals pay Trey Hendrickson too?
Oh, man, this is a tough one. I don't think there is a right answer because there's really no good, completely perfect outcome here. If you let him walk, your entire pass rush is walking out the door. Oof. If you keep him, you really have to hit on every single draft pick because of how bare the cupboard is, thanks to their poor drafting over the last 2 years, and try to find contributors along the margins. I think, personally, the ideal outcome would be to get a trade with a decent return so that you can focus on rebuilding that defense. But if that trade isn't in the offing, I don't think it's worth letting him walk out the door for a minimal return. So it is worth trying to get something done, even if it means you have to draft better than you've drafted for 5 years.
Yeah, I don't think you can trade Trey Hendrickson at this point. Trey Hendrickson last year led the NFL in sacks. Over the last 2 seasons, he has more sacks than anyone else. And so to your point, if you let him walk, it's not a good idea. But if you keep him, your whole salary cap is going to be gone. But I think you have to at least keep him this year. Let's not forget, Trey Hendrickson is still under contract. I know last year, Jamar Chase was having conversations about wanting a deal early. He didn't get it. He played last year, and then he got his deal a little bit later. I know it will cost the Cincinnati Bengals, but if they trade Trey Hendrickson, that means they'll be left with very little when it comes to pass rush, with a defense that has already struggled. So you need to keep him, if it means keeping him on this last year of his contract and maybe signing him next year, or you need to extend him. And if you do extend him, the goal has to be Al Golden. The defensive coordinator has to be the answer because there are talented players on that defense. Chris Jenkins Jr., he had a pretty solid rookie season last year on the interior. If he improves his play, Joseph Osai improves his play, he had a great last 5 games, all of a sudden you'll get the production that you want. But if Al Golden doesn't work out, it's going to be a big-time problem for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Trey Hendrickson is an elite pass rusher, but the longer you wait in the offseason, the more teams fill their needs. Buffalo would have been a potential landing spot. It went out and signed Joey Bosa. Maybe Atlanta would have been interested. It went out and signed Leonard Floyd. And so teams are making moves and filling holes. And with each move that's made, it's one fewer option for Trey Hendrickson, increasing the possibility that he winds up re-signing in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I just want to add, based off of what Mina's saying, just how important he is on this defense. Hendrickson has gotten 39% of the Bengals' sacks in the last 3 seasons. That's the highest rate in the NFL, in case you were wondering. All right, time for one more thing. Remember A.J. Brown got a mannequin to display his unwashed Super Bowl jersey? Well, now he's got a whole team of them, all his jerseys from all the years, even an All-America baseball uniform, making it in the collection. So that's that little guy there, I guess. Back in the day. This is just amazing. Apparently he hasn't washed these, which I like that too. We got our own here on NFL Live, and as you can tell, he's got Dion's glasses on. So I'm actually not going to let him keep them though because I like them too much. This is my new look. I haven't done this enough in the show, so we're going to do it again, obviously. Either way, we'll see you all week on NFL Live. We can't wait to see you tomorrow.
Chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Ngày hôm nay mình sẽ tiếp tục hướng dẫn các bạn tô tượng. Tượng hôm nay của mình là khăn len. Các bạn hôm nay vòng của mình sẽ tự mũ len. Tượng. Màu xanh đầu tiên nhé. Mọi người vào màu xanh nhé.
Chủ ở đâu? Đưa lại áp phê lại đấy. Thôi thằng này tôi đi. Chị Hoàng ơi,
Gì?
chị có tiền không?
Không.
Không biết chị. Bây giờ cái đầu tháng mà. Đầu tháng thì thèm mạnh cuối tháng mới 5 tỷ. Một thầy đầu tháng này phải nó
Mọi người màu xanh này, màu xanh nhé. Tiền để làm gì?
đổ lỗi đâu. Mình đi bán tiền
Mọi người màu cam nhé.
rồi đầu tháng sẽ còn hết tiền đi. Ngoài đi. Đây vào mình trừ sao? Nên Hà Nội trừ. Nhưng mà không phải là như thế này.
Không.
Không phải như thế này. Trời. Không phải như thế này. Đấy. Mà không phải như thế này. Và luôn thế này rồi. Thăm để vậy. Đấy. Thăm để vậy. Thằng không đi nhà tự về. Vài hết tệ đi được đi.
Nghĩa sang đổi tiền với anh trai Nghĩa rồi. Anh trai mày đấy.
Ăn đúng. Thì để sang đi.
Nó đang ngủ, mày sang nó tát nó vỡ mồm.
Không đáp được.
Mọi người đừng can nhé.
Đi. Cô xong ăn rồi. Giờ mình sẽ tiếp câu hỏi này. Đọc kỹ năng xem này. Chơi. Để đọc kỹ năng xem này. Rồi cái này. Đi. Đi sang gọi giấy ra đến phải. Đi gọi giấy ra đến phải.
Gọi sang đây để làm gì á? Nó đang ngủ, đêm mà. Mọi người ơi, tựa của mình hoàn thành rồi nha. Video của mình đến đây là kết thúc rồi. Các bạn thích thì cho mình xin một like và chia sẻ và đăng ký kênh nha.
Không thì lại cái vào đăng ký của gì. Cái mình giao việc xong nói đăng ký có người ta bất ngờ